Let's get it. So, okay, the second, right? Yep. Wait, today's the first. Yep, duh. Right, there we go.
I've spoken with former President Donald Trump in recent weeks, and this is someone who has always had his complaints about the political establishment, had his grievances. It's nothing new. This is Donald Trump, who's been on the political stage now since 2015, nearly a decade since he came down that escalator in New York in the summer of 2015. And his campaign, and he believed that his grievances, his lashing out about border security, about economic pain people are feeling with inflation, it's going to work in places like Western Pennsylvania. I'm still a little hot with John Delano. I was with him in Pittsburgh the other day. We were speaking to high school students, and I was getting a lot of heat because I like Wawa as a convenience store, and Sheetz is the popular one out in Western Pennsylvania. And John's right. It's no surprise that Vice President Harris is speaking with him. Not only is John the best in Pennsylvania, but the Harris campaign needs to do well in Pennsylvania. And think about inside Democratic Party circles tonight, Cecilia. You have a lot of people wondering, can Tim Walz come through and appeal to working voters, men and women in Western Pennsylvania, in those old steel towns and mill towns? Or will there be some regret if Walz has a weak night tonight about her deciding not to go with Josh Shapiro, the popular governor of Pennsylvania? Many Democrats were hoping Shapiro landed on the ticket. Walz got on it. He has to prove himself tonight based on my conversations with top Democrats, because they need him to come through and counter Trump in his appeal to Western PA.
Nancy, I know you were talking to the Walz-Harris campaign. Who do they feel like they need to win over this evening?
Well, you know, Major was talking about the blobs. I think you're going to see a lot more blobs over the next month in Michigan and Wisconsin because Walz is a Midwesterner, and he's been parked in Michigan for the last several days doing debate prep there. That is no accident. We've been seeing him at football games. He was at the Minnesota-Michigan game. We've been seeing him at farms and fall fests. I think I saw him buying a pumpkin the other day. So he is out there in his plaid and his flannel making the case, I'm one of you, because those are such pivotal states. And as John Delano was just pointing out, half of Pennsylvania kind of falls into that Midwestern bucket. So that's who they're hoping he appeals to tonight. You know, we were talking about some of the darkness. What Walz has brought to the Democratic ticket, Democrats argue, is this notion of joy. Yes, he talked about Republicans being weird. We all remember that. But he also talked a lot about joy and how Kamala Harris brings joy to the ticket. You know, a lot of people don't feel all that joyful when they think about politics right now. Will that sell tonight if he brings that kind of energy to the debate? We'll see.
We will see. Okay, coming up, we head to another battleground state, Michigan, to find out what's on voters' minds there. You are watching CBS News coverage of the vice presidential debate.
Let's get it. What's up, everybody? How are we doing today?
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing or bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's
What's up,
not
chat?
fiction.
Good evening,
It's
good evening. How you
48
guys doing?
hours.
Starts in 25 minutes.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so...
Michigan, speaking to voters. Good evening, Jerika.
Good evening to you. Good evening to everyone. You know, Kent County is where we're at here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's a very important county when you look at the numbers. And by that, I mean that this county has picked the winner of the presidential election 3 times out of the 4 last presidential elections. So joining me is this lovely group. They all say they watch CBS, so we love that.
Wow.
But show of hands, briefly, how many of you guys are leaning or planning to vote for Harrison Walz? So we have 2. How many are planning to vote for Trump and J.D. Vance? And then there's 2 left that are undecided. So a CBS News poll shows us that people are watching this debate because they want to hear more about these candidates. What specifically are you looking for, Bill? And I'm going to start with you because you voted for Trump in 2016. You didn't vote at all in 2020. And here you are today trying to figure out who exactly you're going to vote for. So what are you looking for?
I'm looking for a good economy.
A good economy?
Yeah. Safety.
Safety?
Yeah.
He's on Trump.
And Eric, what about you?
I mean, economy is extremely important. Safety as well. I have 2 daughters. I'm a business owner.
Safety as well.
So
I have 2 daughters, but I'm voting for Kamala Harris who wants to
College.
defund the police.
The economy is the main priority for me right now.
Yeah. If all these
And
people were
Christina,
telling
I
the
see
truth,
you
they'd
have
be
your
voting for
notepad.
Trump.
So you
but
are
they're not.
prepared. You are ready to take notes.
I agree. The economy and what was the other thing we were talking about? There were 2 things, the economy.
Safety.
And safety. Oh, yeah, crime.
I know that you're also a voter that was leaning more toward Nikki Haley at one point.
No.
Is that's correct?
No.
Oh, you weren't leaning. Okay, that was Holly?
That was me.
I'm so sorry. You know, there's so many notes that go out. Well, Ellie, let's go back to you then, because
Why
I
is
think
that
it's
a no?
interesting when you have to make this decision. You're looking at this debate while so many people already know who they're going to vote for. You were looking at Nikki Haley as someone that you were really considering, but you're a bit torn. So is there something that these candidates could say or do that would clarify where they stand on any position, or have you feel more confident in who you're going to vote for when you leave today?
Yeah, I think the 3 most important things to me in this election are definitely inflation, abortion rights, and then also gun control. I have 2 little kids, and they're going to school, so that's
You have 2 little kids and you're worried about abortion.
starting to be a little scary now.
And Max, what about you? You have 3 children. You're planning to vote for Trump and Vance. Talk to us about why and what are you hoping to get out of this debate tonight?
I'm really interested to see both Vance and Walz's viewpoints. My biggest concerns and focus points for this election is the economy, immigration, and a strong foreign policy, kind of shore up some of our involvements overseas and bring it back home and get us squared away here.
He's voting Trump.
And that's what we've heard time and time again, even in our polling, the economy, safety, immigration. These are issues that a lot of Americans care about.
Important.
Our job is always to make sure we reveal America to itself. So we thank you guys for joining us tonight to help let people see, regardless of how they feel, this is kind of a taste of what voters are thinking and feeling in this state of Michigan, which we know will be very important in this election. So we'll send it back to you guys, and we'll check in with you a little bit later.
Yeah, you're not going anywhere. We're going to be checking in with you all evening, Jericka. Thank you. Ed Gordon, I want to bring you back in. You've got an important perspective in this because you live outside of Detroit, and we know the suburbs of Detroit, this election in particular, are expected to play a very important role. Given the breaking news that we are watching unfold in the Middle East right now, Vice President Kamala Harris is facing significant questions about her policy in Israel and how and whether she will differ very much.
I thought they were
President
talking
Biden.
to the supporters. I want to hear them
when you were
talk.
talking to your neighbors.
I don't want to
and
hear these
voters
doucheface
in this
talk.
area on this
Fuck.
front.
It's interesting. I'm a Midwesterner, born and raised in Detroit, and today's escalation
Everybody, if
in
you
the
could,
Middle
please make
East
sure to
can
hit that
prove
like for
crucial
me. It really helps
to
out a
this
lot.
state. There is a large Arab population outside of Detroit in Dearborn. They have not been happy with many administrations, not just the Biden administration, but administrations previous. They don't see a balanced view from the White House as relates to Israel and their positions. And so what we're seeing today is going to be unique in terms of whether or not this group can, in fact, be energized, whether they will, in fact, throw their weight behind Kamala Harris. That was the thought early on. But there has not been a clear path to her because of that.
Yeah, I think the question is whether they show up, right, on Election Day.
I was recently in Dearborn, talked to several voters on this very question. This was before what the administration would argue is a clarifying moment, Iran attacking Israel. That takes away some of the obscurity of, is it a militia or what is happening in the region around? It's now Iran, Israel. Harris hopes that that clarifies things, that Israel must defend itself and must be supported. There will be a competition on the debate stage tonight about unequivocal support and the strength of that message delivered by both Walz and Vance. They will be testing each other on that very score.
And very quickly, if you remember in the primaries, that group decided to withhold their votes. They wanted to send a message. We'll see if that was heard.
And have the circumstances changed? Thank you both very much. When we come back, childcare is expensive, housing is expensive. Those are just two of the issue areas we'll look at as we examine where the two candidates stand on everyday costs.
I don't know who's all in here right now. So for everybody that's in here right now, what are your biggest things that matter to you when you're voting this election? If you're voting, if you're even a U.S. citizen, if you're actually voting or not, what are your key things that you're voting on? Yo, let's watch this. 120 victims on Diddy Epstein.
Cowardly keyboard warriors love to attack. We know what we're up against. We did not enter this fray blindly. I wish it was my last such fray. I wish this type of behavior wasn't so pervasive. But it is what it is, so we will press on.
Listen, chat. Diddy has 120 new victims that's coming out that's going to get ready to sue him. So it appears that the Diddy list, not appears,
120 new victims
on the way like yesterday.
As I said, our law firms have been retained by 120 individuals at this point to pursue cases in civil court against Sean Diddy Combs. You should know, in this group, it is evenly divided between males and females. There are 60 males and 60 females who have joined us to pursue these claims as plaintiffs. In this group, 62% identify as African American, 30% are white, the remainder Hispanic or Asian. The victims are from more than 25 states. Majority are from California, New York, Georgia.
They're getting ready to hammer Puff because now that they got these victims coming out and people might say it's a lawsuit, this lawsuit can be used in the current investigation. And what's interesting, they have one lawyer that's representing all these victims. So I'm having to ask all my lawyer viewers, what this means is some type of class action lawsuit where he contacted the victims, where he could have been contacted by the government to take Puff down.
And Florida. I want to focus on the ages of these victims. When you talk about the ages of the victims when the conduct occurred, it's shocking. Our youngest victim at the time of the occurrence was 9 years old. We have an individual who was 14 years old. We have one who was 15. 25 of the 120 individuals who are plaintiffs in these cases were minors at the time of the acts complained of. The time frame of the acts complained of is very wide. The conduct at issue spans from the years 1991 all the way till this year, 2024.
Let it be known that they are alleging that a minor also was involved in this, 9 years old, and claiming that this minor performed on Puff. I don't want to say that here on the tube. You go ahead and, make your conclusion from that. But they're getting ready to really fry him because, like I said, the Diddy files are coming out. We got 120 victims. I don't believe these are going to all be John Does. A couple of them will be John Does, but high-profile people, like we see in the Epstein case. A lot of them transition their name to the John Doe, for their security and multiple reasons, of course. But we will be seeing a lot of names coming out that's in this documentation, hoping to get my hands on that.
If you wonder why there are so many alleged victims, that's your answer. We're talking about more than 25 years of this type of conduct. Now, although most of the victims who have stepped forward were victimized after 2015, this has been going on for a very long time.
Oh, that's wild.
Now, you think about the fact that some of this conduct occurred 25 years ago, and you wonder why would it take somebody so long to step forward. I want to remind you that many states in the United States have recognized that it's very difficult for a victim to step forward and to make these types of allegations when something very...
Now, we do see this typically happens with any case where abuse is something that happens. All of victims come up because I think if you're actually a victim of this, these people, they find a way of manipulating the victims into appearing more powerful than they are. And that leads to the victims being very afraid to ever speak out or say something. Well, in Puff case, as many other abusers, typically the victims do come out when they feel like they're safe. This isn't as if, they're just coming for the money. Yeah, money is an aspect into it, but it isn't what necessarily brings them forward. No,
right.
I think it's the fact that they know that they're safe. It's the safety of the entire aspect of being able to say what you want, to allege of what happened, and not have to worry about your car being exploded or anything else that they allege that Puff does to people.
Very terrible has happened to them. I'll use New York, the state of New York as an example. The state of New York has specific statutes in place that revive claims that are even claims that would typically be not able to be brought, that revive such claims, and they can be brought even 25 to 30 years later. Because there's a recognition there in New York and California and other states that it's very difficult for a victim to come forward. And I would respectfully suggest the only reason many of these people are coming forward is they see other victims coming forward. And it gives them some comfort that, hey, I won't be the only one.
Yep, that's also very huge into it, that when other victims come forward, it lets them know that, hey, it's going to be hard to take down all of us. It's a lot easier to just get rid of me. And this really shows the strength in numbers, not just about abuse, but the government as well. Typically, people won't do something that could help change the government for the better. And I'm not talking about anything with violence, but I'm talking about like going down to your town hall and making a change or even voting. They'll feel like, well, I'm not enough to make a change, not knowing if you make that initial step to help make a change in your community or change in the world, others will follow. And if others follow, it become a movement. Now it's uncontrollable, which is why I feel like the main goal of the Liberal Party, not to get too political, is to make people feel as if they're powerless. Because if you feel like you're powerless, it'll prevent other people from having the opportunity to feel strong. It's for the Diddy situation, not just, like I said, we see in these coming days, the documents that come out, we'll see a lot of celebrities. Don't be surprised if the majority of them are John Does, because people can't really afford to have their name out there, especially for male victims. I'm expecting to see almost no names for male victims unless through these lawsuits, people speak on what they experienced and who they've seen get abused. But typically male victims in these cases, they do go by the alias of a John Doe. But
Crazy.
overall, it's eaten up. It's very interesting. They wouldn't have done this unless it was orchestrated in terms of trying to take him down even more. And it makes me feel like what they currently have on him might not be just enough for them to seal the case. But here's where they have all those dramatic numbers, 120 plus and etc. It helps sell the case for the prosecution.
That's crazy.
Long story short, I think he has someone on documentation on tapes that not supposed to have. And I actually have a DM, an email of someone that has footage of these parties. And I'm trying to see out the safe way to put it out for the people. It's going to be very interesting. We're going to be breaking this down and exposing it in these coming days. Please keep following YouTube. It's going to be worth looking at. It's a win for everyone. It could be a win for me if you like, comment, and subscribe. And see you in my second video today.
Dang, that's crazy. So, did you guys see that? What's going on with like Iran and Israel or whatever? This is nuts, dude. Iran. Who knows what the hell's really going on, though? You know, that's why we can't worry about.
This is a major attack. Jim Sciutto, this is obviously
it's a major attack. There's no
what
question.
You are seeing, what we are all seeing with our own eyes, is a major attack from Iran.
It's a major attack, Dana, and it's an escalation. It's an escalation of this war beyond what we saw. I think potentially beyond what we saw in April when Iran launched dozens of missiles and drones. This attack, according to U.S. intelligence, principally or perhaps entirely ballistic missiles, which are the fastest by far and the most dangerous. And now what we're seeing in addition to those intercepts is we're seeing fragments falling to the ground. It's like a deadly fireworks display over Tel Aviv. Goodness, there was an impact just to the left of us here.
And you're talking about Tel Aviv, Jim. We are looking at pictures right now. Oh, we are looking at pictures of Tel Aviv, what you're describing.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, God. Okay, guys, we got to get off the roof. These are coming down right next to us here.
Please do, Jim. Please do.
They're coming down. Crazy. One just about. We got to go inside.
Jim, please take cover. We are listening and we are watching.
It's kind of crazy.
We are following breaking news. Iran launching a barrage of missiles into Israel. A major escalation in the conflict in the Middle East. I'm Anderson Cooper alongside my colleague Wolf Blitzer. We've witnessed missiles intercepted across Israel a short time ago as air raid sirens went off on the ground below. The Israeli military now confirms some of those missiles made a direct impact in central and southern Israel. It's estimated Iran launched nearly 200 projectiles. Iran says this attack was in response to the killing of Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah and other
assassinations. Here in like 7 minutes,
A source says the Israeli
Tyler.
Security Cabinet is in their emergency bunker right now, and the Israeli military says Iran's attack, and I'm quoting now, will have consequences. The White House says both President Biden and Vice President Harris are in the White House Situation Room monitoring the situation. We're standing by to get an immediate update from White House officials and from the U.S. State Department. We also expect to hear from the Pentagon. I want to show you the moment CNN crews saw the Iranian missiles entering Tel Aviv's airspace earlier this afternoon. Watch this.
This is a major attack.
This is
Jim
crazy.
Sciutto, this is obviously
It's a major attack. There's no
Did you see this, Tyler?
What we are all seeing with our
Iran started firing missiles at Israel.
Iran.
It's a major attack,
That's
Dana,
crazy.
and it's an escalation. It's an escalation.
Okay, yeah, because we already heard that guy talk. I want to see this.
تعال شوفها من هون تعال شوفها من هون ماما
Holy sh! That's wild. Imagine seeing that. Dude,
What
look
we're
at all
seeing in
those.
addition to those intercepts is we're seeing fragments falling to the ground. It's like a deadly fireworks display over Tel Aviv.
And
Goodness,
you're
there was an
talking
impact
about
just
Tel
to the left
Aviv.
of us here.
And you're talking about Tel Aviv, Jim. We are looking at pictures right now. Oh, we are looking at pictures of Tel Aviv, what you're describing.
Oh, Jesus.
Dude, that's
Oh, God.
crazy.
Okay, guys, we got to get off the
Imagine
roof. They're
hearing
coming
this.
down right next to us here.
Please do, Jim. Please do.
They're coming down. One just about. We got to go inside.
So that was roughly an hour and a half ago. I want to go back to Jim Shudo, who is still in Tel Aviv, back on the roof. He sought cover at a certain point about an hour or so ago. Jim, just talk about what
I do
first
not
of all,
like
how
to
are
hear
things
him
right
talk.
now, and talk a little bit about
We got 4
the
minutes
video
chatting
that
and
we
the
just
debate
saw,
starts.
what we were looking at.
Jake Tapper's annoying.
So right now, I should be clear, the air raid sirens have ended, and there was an announcement, in fact, a short time ago saying it's okay to return safely. And as I understand it, even Iranian officials have said that this attack, from their perspective, is over. But let me describe, as this was happening, and to be clear, it's our whole team here, and you know well, Anderson, that there's a lot of folks that go into getting images like that on the air. What we were seeing was not just the incoming missiles, but the whole array of Israeli air defenses firing to intercept those missiles. And it's multi-layered around the city, both in terms of the altitudes they strike, but also just layers of defenses. And as it struck me as I was watching it, is that they were coming to a meeting point in the sky just above us, just to the east of us here, but also increasingly above our heads, so that we could see the missile fragments, as you're seeing there, coming down, or perhaps the intercepted missiles, once they'd completed their mission, perhaps struck a target, coming down. And the one you just saw right there on the screen, because I believe that's the top of our hotel there with the blue light, came just to the right of us. And once
Dude,
it was
that's
clear to
crazy.
me, Anderson
Imagine
and Wolf,
seeing that.
that these intercepts were taking place above our heads, gravity works, we decided to go inside until that particular barrage was over. Then there was a pause in between. We came out again, and then there was a second barrage of about the same duration. So at least dozens of missiles, it seems. And I find it remarkable, frankly, that there were no casualties, as Admiral Hagari just said a short time ago, because in addition to those impacts that you're seeing there on the air, there was quite a large one just to the north of us, with flames and smoke rising off in the distance. So I think that folks were listening to those air raid signals. Thankfully, they were going into shelters. They have a lot of experience with that here, and there was probably some good fortune involved that prevented there being casualties. I should note, though, we mentioned this earlier, there were casualties tonight in Tel Aviv, 8 people killed at a light rail station, a shooting at a light rail station just before those missiles started falling, and Israeli authorities say they're investigating that as a potential terrorist attack.
I want to go now to our Ben Wiedemann, who is standing by in Beirut. Ben, explain what you heard from your vantage point in Beirut as these strikes were going on in Israel.
What we saw, Anderson, was fireworks over the southern suburbs of Beirut, an area where Hezbollah has many supporters. We also heard celebratory gunfire.
All right, let's get over there. We got 1 minute. Look at him, dork.
Standing a lone man behind
my two. Live in a time of assassination attempts.
incredible floods in North
Right.
Carolina, which also is a platform.
Get
for evidence.
It is, because handling of natural disasters is often a proxy for voters of competence. They look at how you handle something like that and they say this person is capable of handling big, important things. And that's why President Biden tomorrow is heading to North Carolina and South Carolina, and Florida and Georgia the next day.
And here we see the vice presidential candidates there. Tim Walz standing alone.
That's what they'll be looking for tonight.
No handshake.
My dog, J.D. Vance. Let's get it.
Handshake, and there you have Governor
What up,
Walz.
Tay?
We'll be taking some notes. J.D. Vance doing the same as our colleagues.
And they were shaking hands before the cameras came.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
Well, we have the vice presidential debate coming up in a moment. It will be moderated by our own Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance.
This is going to be
Minnesota Governor Tim
3-on-1.
Walz
We all
take
know
the
it.
Stage. Well, they've taken the stage. So stick with us here and join us also on our streaming channels, CBS.
Like 1,000%, this is going to be a 3-on-1 debate, and I'll guarantee Vance still holds his own. At minimum. If not, he just slaughters them all. We won't be slaughtered.
Tonight, with just over a month to go until Election Day, the first and only meeting between the two men who hope to become Vice President of the United States, Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio.
Now, this is likely the final debate of this
Poor
election
JD
cycle, and
will
voting
beat
is
Tim
already
Craig.
underway in 20 states. CBS News polling
Yeah,
shows
he's
this
funny.
remains a race.
My one dude
either
made me notice he
presidential
kind of looks like a
candidate
Chucky
could win.
doll.
The CBS News vice presidential debate starts now.
Fight for every single vote, and we're going to take this country back.
And we are ready to continue to build the future together.
We're going to turn this whole country red with President Donald J. Trump's leadership.
Let's get
At the
it.
end of this little journey, Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States.
This is a CBS News special, live from CBS News headquarters in New York. America Decides, the vice presidential debate.
I like it. Everybody, if you guys could, please
Good
make sure
evening,
to hit
I'm
the
Nora
like for me.
O'Donnell,
It really
and
helps
thank
out a
you
lot.
for joining us for tonight's CBS News vice presidential debate.
Oh,
we want to
God.
welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our
Oh, shit. Sorry, I did not mean to push that button.
Check this out. State
Push
Farm
the
was
wrong
charging me
fucking button.
$179 for auto insurance per month. No, thank you.
Republican Senator J.D. Vance tonight meeting for the first time.
I don't care what it was.
I'm Margaret.
So, it's going to be 3 girls versus J.D. Vance. Is that what we're seeing? 3 chicks versus J.D. Vance?
At one candidate
cool
who
with
will
it.
have 2 minutes to respond.
Oh, you'd be
The
1,000%
other
better
candidate
than
will be
Kamala.
allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional
I don't know
1
how
minute
much that
each at the
means, though,
discretion
because
of
I
the
feel
moderator.
like
The
my
primary
dogs
role
could
of the
be better
moderators
presidents
is to
than Kamala.
facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics
Oh! Now they reserve the right. Now it's not both of them are muted. They reserve the right this time. All right.
Or Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action.
I got mine.
President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners.
Ooh, you just lost them.
Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental.
He's looking
and
at it
ending
like,
the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly,
unfortunately,
said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them,
here's what they said
to the Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together, understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the Vice President said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit, because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me, and she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe. And
yeah, that's on them. That's a very good answer. I don't like that we're giving them money, but they should be able to do whatever they want.
Thank you, Senator.
Vice versa.
Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago,
why is
the
it an
US
attack on
must now
Trump?
make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you.
These
Let's turn
chicks
now to
are
Hurricane
fucking.
Helene. The storm could become
Yeah,
one of the
right,
deadliest
right.
on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change
Everybody hit
makes
the like
these
for me if you
hurricanes
could.
larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Eat it, dude. These
First
are
of all,
fucking
let's
biased
start with the
questions.
hurricane because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then, of course, afterwards, to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job, and I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say, Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
There you go.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane. And my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency management. Governors,
Is he reading
no partisanship. They work together so all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover, but we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax. and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years.
Senator.
Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse by the climate.
your time is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know, and like I said again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our #1 export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign, and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that, and an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how
we're going to send people back to their countries?
Example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil?
No, we'll send them back with their
So
kids.
first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Some people
Governor,
think things about people, and then
do you
when
care
they get
to
to
respond
see,
to any of the
who they
specific
really are,
allegations,
maybe
including that the
take
vice
a liking to
president
them.
is, quote,
You
letting
ever have somebody
in
who like somebody always talks shit
and
about,
using
like you thought you
kids
weren't going to
as
like
drug
them,
mules,
and then you
among
ended up
other
being cool with that
things
person?
regarding
well,
children?
the drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history. 30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this. And that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents. Detection for drugs. DOJ money to speed up.
But what it is
the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him to, what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall.
You guys fought him tooth and nail.
Listen, 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again.
But they did send over 40 or 50,000
dehumanizing people,
soldiers to guard the border.
Going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this, and Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true, don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point,
you
like
guys
this,
are the ones that
we
caused it,
dehumanize
man.
and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been. And it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed, you've got hospitals that are overwhelmed, you've got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim, and I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
There you go. Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree, it should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles.
But you guys are trying to give everybody free citizenship. Fuck
Matthew
that.
25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us, you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it. And it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status.
No, they gave them legal status. No, bitch. No, bitch. No, bitch. No, bitch. No.
Since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand.
Right.
That is not a person coming for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own.
Senator, for
bitch. You got made look stupid, you dumb bitch. Fuck out of here. I'm like, fuck out of here. Why are you just letting him talk when you tried to stop him? Fuck you, bitch.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics
Well,
are
we heard him.
We have
We
so
heard
much
her.
we want to get
We
to.
heard
Thank
him.
you for explaining the legal process. Nora?
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan. With
Why you guys
down payment
make the
assistance on
housing
front
market
end
go up,
to get
though?
you a
Why'd you
house.
make the
A house
percentage
is
rates
much
go up?
more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs
Donald Trump
$5
started
to
it,
make
but-
insulin.
and it's all-
They were charging $800 before this law went into
Donald
effect.
Trump started
As
that,
far
and
as
you
the
got it for
housing
only old
goes,
people. You
I've
don't
seen
have
it
it
in
for
Minnesota.
everybody.
12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by 1/3. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise,
Who's
and I'll give you
paying
this.
for
kept
all
it.
this?
He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class.
I got more back in my taxes
$8 trillion increase in the national debt, the
ever
largest ever.
under Trump
Now
than
he's
I did under
proposing
anyone else.
a
This guy's
20%
lying.
consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase
Yeah.
inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do, we'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer, a lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do. And some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies, and what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%, open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom. Because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country.
Make beards great again. Let's get it.
And to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one. Whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump.
Why is his eyes so
same thing goes
wide?
with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, or whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years? And the last year as president. That's what's wrong with the system. There's a
Why
way
do they keep
around it,
talking
and he's
about this?
bragged about that. We're just asking
Yeah, that's
for
your
fairness
fault.
in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop, and we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a gross generalization.
that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
you
Mark.
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look,
Why are they fact checking anybody from something from 1989? Who gives a fuck?
Rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID, and I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing.
He didn't praise anybody
about
COVID.
It's about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community, and then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier, or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
You don't know what to say.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism.
2020.
You're now his running mate.
We'll go back in a minute,
you've
Monica.
shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews. I think it's important to actually explain to the American people.
This is exactly true.
The issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out to messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the board.
No, JD got that dog in him.
I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican
He's got that
Congress
presidential
and the
dog
Democrats
in
in
him.
Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing And you're not, probably surprised to
JD
hear me
got that
praising
dog
Joe
in him,
Biden, but
boy.
the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that
Him's a little
protected
kitty
American
cat.
manufacturing jobs. And it's the one
Staldy.
issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China
love
at
it.
$3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says you're not accessing
Look
our
how
markets
salty he
unless you're
looks.
paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion.
Yeah.
Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine.
No, I didn't give
Yes
JD
or
butter.
no?
I don't
Is
get
that
down
what you
like that,
support?
Tyler.
I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill
And don't
says,
talk
but
about
look,
Monica like
this-
that either.
This
You'll be
issue
grounded
is
twice.
what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have
You
been an
support
abortion.
abortion
But
into the
in
9
Texas,
months.
that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific.
terrible.
Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies.
Oh, Project
It's going to make it
2025
more
just
difficult, if
endorsed
not
Kamala
impossible,
Harris.
to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works.
Yeah,
this
it is.
basic human right.
No,
have
this
seen
is, we are individual
maternal
states.
mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about health care. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in health care for a reason. We trust women, we trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion,
They don't care
that it
about
would have
anyone.
destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party,
That's
we've
not a
got to do
reason to
so
have an
much
abortion.
better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give
crazy.
women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions. Let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked, and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body,
What is he
is
on?
determined on geography? There's a very real chance, had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, you know, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making child care more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care.
Women were so
and
my
as far
body,
as
my
making
choice,
sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all.
Yes, it is.
We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case
pro-abortion.
to make options for children more affordable.
It's actually pro-death
$6,000
because
child tax credit.
you can't call something pro-life and then
of
not
making
call the
someone like
opposite
Amber
of it.
Thurman
Opposite of it.
drive
The
600
opposite
miles
of
to
it.
try
So
and get
if you're
health care.
Senator?
May I respond to
then
that? First of all,
if you're
Governor,
not
I agree with
pro-life,
you. Amber Thurman should
you're
still be
pro-death.
alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law,
Then why do they
statute that you
want
signed into
why
law,
do they want the
it
government to
says
tell
that
them
a
what to do?
doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives,
I
the
just
doctor
think-
is
I
under
think
no
abortion's
obligation
wrong.
to provide
I
life-saving
think it's
care
wrong. I
to
don't
a
care.
baby who survives a botched late-term abortion.
I don't
That
tell people what
is,
to
I
do.
think,
I
whether
never
you're
will.
pro-choice or
That's not
People
pro-abortion,
do whatever they
that
want
is
because I don't have to
fundamentally
answer
barbaric.
to
And
God
that's
for
why I use that
anybody.
word, Nora, is
They have to
because
answer to God
some
for
of what we've
themselves.
seen. Do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family.
I'll never agree with it.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition.
Sucks
These are
too,
women's
you know.
decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written
Facts.
to try and make a point. That's not it at all.
What was I wrong
This
about,
was-
Governor? Please tell me. What was I wrong
That
about?
is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But
this.
how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things work best
But
when Roe versus
what
Wade
if the
was in
what
place.
if the what
When
if the
we do
baby's a
restoration of
female?
Roe, that works best. That
Why
doesn't
doesn't she get a
preclude us
choice? I don't
from
get it.
increasing funding for children. It
Where's
doesn't
her
increase
rights?
us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to
What do
make
you
life
mean, Vaughn?
easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a
After the
response.
kid
Not
is
the
born,
case. It's
then you
not
take
true.
care
That's
of 'em
not
and
what the
you
law
raise 'em.
says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
It's crazy. Tim Walz is terrible. He's not a smart man at all. These debates are so pointless. What do you guys think so far? I think Vance is by far way better, and neither one of them. I don't really care. It don't matter. No, honestly, if women get an abortion just because yeah, he makes much more sense. If women want to get an abortion just because they feel like they can't afford it in life, then they should have to pay for it, and it shouldn't be cheap. No taxpayer dollars should be paid on abortion to really make them think about it, like, okay, do I want to kill this? Do I want to do this? Or do I want to spend all this money? You know what I mean? Yeah, no, they shouldn't. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I get what you're saying. We shouldn't be paying for them, though. You're right, though, regardless. Like, if people wanted to get an abortion, they should have to pay for it. It shouldn't be no tax. It shouldn't be on me just because you want to be irresponsible. Fuck out of here. That's what's wrong with us. We always try to fucking coddle everybody, dude. Like, fuck that.
Of Saturday Night Live comes Mean Girls, the hilarious hit Broadway musical. Entertainment
Right, no,
Weekly
for
says
sure. It's wrong, period. But the government shouldn't be funding that stuff at all. It's weird. It's fucking weird. Oh, this is a commercial. I thought this was like a commercial on the TV, on the show. Why is this dude just looking like that?
Of congressional members.
That was the most awkward cutscene I've ever seen, bro. That dude looks so goofy. Right, if women want to go have abortions, I 1000% don't support it. But we shouldn't have to pay for it. The fuck? I'm not paying for your irresponsibilities. Just like if somebody goes to school and then decides to drop out and wants us to cover for them with our taxpayer dollars to get their schools done with. Fuck out of here, dude. Do it yourself. You made the decision, live with it. Crazy, Monica. This is just like common sense. I'm not even like getting into anything. This is just me speaking from a common sense standpoint. It just doesn't. The whole country is just so illogical as a collective. I don't get it, bro. I really don't get it anymore. You're a towel, Tyler. Brian, who do you think's doing better so far?
Welcome back to the CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children
They try
and
to tell you
teens
that
in
the
America
violence is down, but now there's
by
all of a sudden a
firearms.
gun violence
Senator
epidemic.
Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles.
She'd
including
probably win in a
AR-15s.
debate with Tim Walz.
So let me ask
Maybe.
you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartel. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that worked. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator?
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. And I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said, actually, about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly, weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse, or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position.
Good job, Vance.
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today.
Pheasant hunt.
Several things I want to mention on this is talking about cities and where it's at. The number one, where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are
Tyler
rural
is a
suicides.
Canadian maple tree.
And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues. Making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns, and there are things that you can do about it.
No,
but
guns don't kill
this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have
it won't.
This issue of housing.
We're already giving Ukraine enough fucking money.
The problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the Vice President is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, one of the, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance.
You guys have a higher percentage rate than when Trump was in office.
Because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that
it's
we
also
don't
you
have
guys
enough
sending all this
naturally
money overseas.
affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens? If you lower energy prices, as Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill, one of the biggest drivers of housing costs aside from illegal immigration is, think about it, if a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Where, Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But, Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing.
Yeah, but it'll still help us out a lot,
especially
if we open back up the Keystone
Pipeline. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in.
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the facts. I guess we agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's
not true.
Blaming and not trying to find a solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this. And I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. Look, it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time.
Yes,
Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. Think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do. But I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better healthcare policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to. Go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low, take-home pay was higher, and he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens is... So you think the individual mandate's a good idea? You shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect
No, we shouldn't have to, though.
When we
shouldn't be fined if we don't want it.
This way,
that's what the mandate
was. Incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret?
Can I address that?
I apologize. We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family and medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family and medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. I don't know if I'm on one. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start, the family works better, we stay in their employers, we get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota, and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it...
I don't think we should have to have health insurance if we don't want it, though.
Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those...
Isn't that what the basic one is, though?
He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure
I'm only on Medicare, though, because they told me I had to or I was going to get
fined.
fined.
Makes it really hard for
and I
people to
just
choose
never
the
got
family
taken
model
off
they want.
of it.
A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little
Well,
time
no,
home with the
elaborate. If
kids.
you're going
Some
to
would like
say
spend
something, just
longer at home
elaborate
with the
on what
kids.
you're
We should have
you're
a
saying.
family
That's
care
fine.
model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of child care model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with child care. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide child care in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote child care because, look, it is unacceptable.
How am I being
And,
contradictory?
of course,
Hold
Senator
on a
and I have been
minute.
on the campaign trail a lot the past.
Tell me how I'm being contradictory in that aspect, right? Explain how that is at all contradictory. Because I literally said the only reason I got it is because they were going to fine me for not having health insurance. So explain what you mean by that, because that's illogical to that.
Family.
That doesn't
the
make
Federal
sense.
Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on childcare as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as childcare is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, child care options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6 as your campaign
All right,
has
good one.
promised. Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening
It's a
tonight knows.
benefit.
I mean,
I
I'm sure they
understand
were
what you're
shocked.
saying, but what I'm trying to tell you, Vaughn, is the only reason I got it is because they told me that if I didn't have it, I would get fined. So it's either get it or get fined. Would you rather get it or get fined? It's not. I hardly go to the doctors or the hospital, so it's not really a benefit. Here's the thing that you're not understanding, right? And this is what I try to explain to people with like health insurance. It's not. It's not a privilege to live. It is in the aspect of, God and everything. But you shouldn't have to. You shouldn't find people just to live. It's not like driving a car. The fine thing was struck down by the Supreme Court eventually. Yeah. No, Trump got rid of it. That's what the mandate was.
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign
when
and
Trump
others
was in
filed
office,
62
bro.
lawsuits
We're talking
contesting
about
the
when
results.
fucking Obama.
Judges,
That's when
those
I got
appointed
it,
by
and
President
they
Trump
just
and
renew
other
it on me.
Republican presidents looked at the evidence.
That's what I'm trying
and
to
said
say.
there was no widespread fraud. The
I don't do
governors
anything
of
to
every
refill it
state
out. They
in the
just
nation,
renew it all the time.
Republicans
I don't
and
care. I don't really go
Democrats
to the doctor or
certified
hospital,
the 2020
so I don't
election
care anyway.
results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states
I
to
wouldn't have
submit
either.
alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek
It's
to
not
challenge
illegal.
this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues, and that to me is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this. And the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag, several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history,
they lie about
that
January
a president
6th.
or
Everybody.
anyone tried to overturn a fair election.
He didn't,
and a peaceful
though.
transfer
They're
of power.
lying.
And
They're
here
lying.
we are 4 years
It's a
later
lie.
in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country
And
apart.
stop trying to fucking kill him.
Margaret? Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country.
Yeah, you were
We are
with
gonna
me.
shake
I already
hands
knew.
after this
I know
debate
you
and
know
after
because
this
you were
election.
standing
Of
next
course,
to me,
I hope
holding
that we
my
win, and I
fucking
think we're going to
pocket.
win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Yeah.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump didn't do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions.
Jose, hit the like,
this idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance, I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement. But this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. No, it wasn't. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the
That's what
policies
debates
of the
are,
government,
basically,
which is
Jose.
the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
I don't run Facebook. What
my
do
buddy
know
Jason's
is
joining
I see
us.
a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall?
Jason's already
if
jumping
he
on.
knows
They're already in
he
Discord
could do
together.
anything, including taking an election and his vice president's not going to stand to it. That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office?
I don't want you arguing
even
with Richie
if
and
the
DG
president
anyway,
doesn't?
Jose,
And
you
I think
son of a
Kamala
bitch.
Harris would agree. She wouldn't
Richie
have picked
doesn't
me if
like
she
you,
didn't
bro.
think I
I'm
would
not
do that.
fucking.
Because
I'm
of
not
course that's what we
airing
would
that
do.
right now.
So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate continues.
I thought this was over at 10:30. Yeah. Yo, doesn't this end at 10:30? Are we behind on a debate or something?
The House will be in order.
This year, C-SPAN celebrates 45 years of covering Congress like no other. Since
The fantastic
1979,
thing about
we've been your
Hannahstone is
primary
there's
source
such
for Capitol Hill, providing balanced, unfiltered coverage of government, taking you to where the policy is debated and decided, all with the support.
Yeah, let's at least watch it on Fox. Ugh. Why? I thought it was only going till 10:30. Why is it going so long? What do you guys think so far, chat? All right, you guys. I think we're gonna just end it at that. I'm gonna get on my gaming stream. So if you guys want to join me there, let me know. We will see you guys later. Have a wonderful evening. Peace.